Hi, friends. Catherine here. I want to thank you for watching this podcast that I got to record with my friend Samuel. I met Samuel last year at an ancestral skills gathering, and he came to the ancestral storytelling workshop. And towards the end of the evening, he shared a dream, a beautiful dream that connects him back to his lineage in Oaxaca, Mexico. And they are a lineage of weavers. And the thing that stands out to me the most about this conversation is the way that he places us inside of deep time. He shares with us what it means to live inside of a story that is so much greater than our little lives. He talks about our troubles as little knots inside of the weave that belong to a tapestry that defies comprehension. And I really love this perspective because when I'm in major life transition, in the experience of chaos or destruction, one of the things that ancestral stories have done for me is they help me to remember that I'm a part of a larger fabric of stories that are holding me. And this shift in identity from my individual life into a larger tapestry of generations that's holding me has provided me with a lot of strength and resilience. So I hope that you enjoy this conversation as much as I did, and feel free to reach out with what's impacted you the most.
In the midst of chaos, we tend to lose ourselves. We tend to lose sight, and we get very tied up in that little knot that's delaying the weaving. But in the big scheme of things, it's just a tiny knot, on a pattern that's huge beyond comprehension.
So many of us who reach into ancestral knowledge in the States are doing so through a broken line.
And also, but that's the beauty of it, it's rediscovering something that's lost. It's very, you give it more value.
Samuel, how are you?
Hola. Good.
It's so good to see you. Where are you?
I'm here in my shop in Oaxaca City.
Beautiful. Oh, nice.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, I'm so glad that we're connecting. Thank you for taking the time.
It's an honor and a pleasure to be part of this woven network of teachings and lineages. Yeah, I'm happy that we connected.
I really want to ask about this story, and I wonder if you'll share this story with me.
My earliest memories as a weaver, it's that I am connected to the loom by my umbilical cord. And I used to have this recurring dream when I was a baby, I don't know. I remember, like, that's the earliest thing I remember. Before even an awake memory, I remember that dream. And it used to be this recurring dream that I'm falling on the other side of the loom into infinity. And all I see is my dad's face weaving, like kind of weaving me into existence. And later, I found out, or yeah, when I shared this dream with my mom, she's like, "Oh, maybe it's because your dad used to carry you on a backpack, like those baby carriers, while he was weaving on the big loom." And so that memory, that dream came to me again when I did my first ayahuasca ceremony. And it took me straight back to that dream. And how, in a way, we are like the fabric of our parents, you know, creation. Like even our DNA is this double helix interwoven pattern. And that really just made sense. That dream really made sense then. And yeah, and my mom passed away a year and a half ago, and now it's just my dad who's still holding the family together. And he's there, like solid as a loom and still weaving us into existence and shaping us and guiding us through this world that's crazy and messy and knotted sometimes.
Mm. Yeah. This is incredibly powerful.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. It's very, in ceremony sometimes you feel like you've already lived everything once, and this is just the reflection in another reality, but in another dimension, sort of speaking. It already happened, and we know that at the end, it's all gonna be good, and it's all gonna be sorted out, and the universe will find its equilibrium, its balance, the way it's supposed to happen. And in the midst of chaos, we tend to lose ourselves. We tend to lose sight, and we get very tied up in that little knot that's delaying the weaving. But in the big scheme of things, it's just a tiny knot, on a pattern that's huge beyond comprehension. So yeah, that's the way I see it.
Yeah. A tiny knot
That's how it makes sense. Yeah,
in a tapestry that's so big it defies comprehension.
yeah.
Hmm.
And that has to do also with our cosmovision in our pre-Hispanic philosophy, way of life, understanding of life. We talk about the Nahual and the tonal ways of perception. So the Nahual is that totality of of the cosmos, of the entire universe, of the entire creation. And the tonal is just our tool of perception through words and language and the awake state and the conscious mind. We have, you know, an understanding of like a tiny dot in that big tapestry, and we understand just that tiny bit. We could, move around and explore, but we're always limited to the way in which we perceive things. And it doesn't mean that we shouldn't, seek to understand things and to see how things are connected. But we also should understand that it's a limited way, that that's where the dream world becomes more potent because we're not limited by those words or by those concepts, or our way of perception is more fluid. It's less hindered. We do have less control of it, but that's the that's the art of the Nawal, of the shamans, to master that way of perception, that unconscious mind, that void, that vastness and that immensity. Um, you know, it's it's a journey to learn how to navigate that world and not to get lost in it and to make sense of it and to come back to this awake state where we can communicate more clearly, more precisely with each other. And every one of us, bringing a little piece from that totality, mending that fabric, of reality, and yeah, just creating the reality that we perceive.
Can you tell me what it's meant for you to have a generational framework within which you have been born and can operate? Like so many of us who reach into ancestral knowledge in the States are doing so through a broken line. And when you speak about this, these modes of perception and that they belong to a framework that goes back, it feels like you're able to rely on or operate inside of something larger than you in an immediate way.
Yes, it totally makes sense. I think most peoples, were born into a culture, a landscape, a lineage that still has, a connection. We just missed it. And even I didn't know any of this when I was a teenager. I had no clue, and I had to search for those answers. They have been erased for you know 500 years of colonization. So I had to do my homework too. I had to
Mm,
go reflect, talk to the elders, and reflect upon the stories, and then read books, and then piece everything together, the archaeological findings, the history that had been, you know, rewritten by the winners, by the invaders, with an agenda. And then slowly and little by little, this knowledge has been coming together. And it's still like, I by no means I'm knowledgeable in the way I feel comfortable, you know, but it's all part of a journey. And I think most of us, can trace our lineage. We didn't come out of nowhere. We're all like old beings and old cultures. We're just being disconnected, and it started with the Industrial Revolution, with the loss of the commons, when, in order to, but even before that, also old civilizations, they were, also, yeah, like, we were disconnected, by all the powers that be that wants to control us and to shape our lives and our existence. And through time, like even in the history that we inherited, there's the mythology of like four different creations before this one, the current fifth son. So yeah, I think it's yes, it is it is a privilege to be born in a place where those stories are still told. But also, I think there is very few parts in the world where those stories are intact and unbroken. I hear stories of the Aboriginal people in Australia who have like 60, 80,000 year old stories. But also, their communities are struggling through colonization and industrialization, modernity.
mhm.
And you could go as remote as you like, and all those communities are still struggling to maintain these stories. Um, and also, but that's the beauty of it. It's rediscovering something that's lost. It's very,
Yes,
you give it more value. So maybe
yes.
it's part of the journey. It's part of breathing in and out. It's part of construction and deconstruction. It's part of a cycle that's meant to be here.
Yeah, remembering is a very special part of the cycle.
Hmm.
And I love that it came back to you through the dream.
Yeah, yeah, that was incredible. Now that I reflect on it,
And you're a weaver, right?
yeah, yeah,
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
yes. Well, I do believe that at least in our village, we never had a broken lineage of weaving, because we've been weavers since we created our culture. the earliest textiles found are made with agave fiber. After making twine and rope, people started to weave little pouches. You could do it, we could still do it with our fingers. You weave in and out around your fingers, and then you thread the threads in the gap that you created with your fingers, and then you can make a pouch that you can turn into a slingshot. That's the easiest type of weaving. That later
Wow.
evolved into the backstrap loom, where the fingers became the warp threads that hold the structure of the weaving. And like 10,000 years ago, we started to create agriculture, to create a lifestyle that was centered around corn because the climate changed. And actually, our grandparents, the time when the central valleys where we live, they used to be like lakes. And the last time that happened, that was like 20,000 years ago during the last ice age, when the last woolly mammoth and like prehistoric horses and some types of camelids that later moved to South America and became the llamas and alpacas. They were
Mm,
roaming around here. And the archaeological evidence confirms, those stories that are true. That they found, I forget the name, but like the last remnants of like the prehistoric bison that were
mm,
roaming here in the Central Valley of Oaxaca. And yeah, so our people kind of just adapted to the times, to the landscapes, to the changes in the environment. And as the climate, got hotter and warmed, we stopped, wearing furs or collecting woolly mammoth hair to fill our gloves and boots for insulation. And I guess other plants appeared, and among them, corn, beans, squash, cotton plants, and medicinal plants as well, like marigold, cempasúchil flowers, cacti, and many. We developed a relationship with many plant sisters that fed us, nurtured us, healed us, held us, provided us with warmth and medicine, and yeah, we started to build this tapestry where we're all interwoven in this landscape. And we had been doing that for a very long time. Um, at the time when later, like thousands of years later, I think around 400 years before the current era, our ancestors started to build like big cities, the very first big cities on this continent, the sacred Jaguar Mountain called Monte Alban. And that project took them roughly 1,000 years in the golden era of our culture, 1,000 years of collaboration and cooperation. Because as soon as you have agriculture, you start to have problems. There's a point where people start to take up land, and then the towns grow. In the beginning, there's plenty of space, but as the valley became more and more populated, and then villages started to compete with each other for the best and most fertile lands. Then we also have the evidence of the very first wars here in the Etla Valley of Oaxaca. They talk about like some of the earliest wars on this continent because you know that's kind of like the dynamic that happens with agriculture. So we had to find solutions to that, and the way our ancestors figured that out was to develop a system in which first, I mean, like a land management system that allow the land to recover and to rest for like, you know, I don't know exactly how many years, but they would plant a plot of land for like 8 years and then leave it to rest for like 4 years. And then they'll move on to a next plot. Um, and so on and so forth. And they've like recent scientists have done studies, for example, of pine and oak forests in the Mixtec region, where it looks as if these pine forests or pine and oak forests were pristine. But in fact, when they do the studies and they've been tended by humans, they've been cut down, they've been disturbed by fire, and they've been planted, and then they've been left to recover. So that
Mm.
small disturbance, it's healthy for the ecosystem, that loosens the soil and creates like a healthy disturbance. And then it's just left like untouched for like a certain amount of decades. So anyway, that kind of rhythm was developed and refined, and yeah, and like it took our civilization like 1,000 years to build all this knowledge, to build an astronomical knowledge, to know exactly when to plant corn, and to figure out the weather patterns and the microclimates that happen in this valley. Because when you plant corn, even a 2-week period will make a huge difference on the amount of yield that you have. And for that, we had to uh, figure out a calendar system. So we are inheritors of this incredible calendar. That's the same. It's the same calendar that is known as the Mayan calendar, the Aztec calendar, the Zapotec calendar. It's been used from like Nicaragua all the way up to the southwest of the U.S. in what we call Anahuac, which is the North American plate, pretty much. There is trade routes that even link our people with Inuits from Alaska. They found Inuit tools in Montalban, suggesting that people from Alaska made their way down, or those tools made their way down to here. And yeah, so this calendar is it's a 13 month based calendar. It has 13 numbers and 20 days, which when you multiply gives you 260 days, which is roughly 9 months, which is the average gestation period of a human. So our calendar is connected to our human rhythm, to the nature, and then to the cosmos, because 260 is a small cycle of 26,000 years, which is the period it takes for the Earth to wobble around its own axis. It's
Wow.
known as the precession of the equinoxes.
Mm-hmm.
And then next to that, we had another calendar, the civil calendar, which has 18 numbers and 20 days, which gives you 360 days, on top of which they add like the 5 more days to complete the 360-year cycle, that 365-day cycle. But they knew that it takes the Earth, a little longer, like a quarter more to do the full cycle around the sun. So instead of adding like 1 year like we do now every 4 years, they add, I think, 13 days every 52 years, which when you do the maths ends up becoming more precise. And they figure out schemes to adjust the calendar and to minimize the error. So much so that even modern astronomers using like computers and like programming language software, they are amazed at the advancements of our calendar system. And now going back to your earlier statement and or question about how does it feel, to be inherited of such a vast knowledge, I think it's intimidating, it's daunting, because there's so much to learn, there's so much to know, there's so much you know, to soak, but you know that it's already there. So the Mayans have on a stone carving in Coban, they have a date that's I think 28,000 and something quadrillion years old. Like right
Wow.
now, modern scientists say that the universe was created 13.8 billion in like English American billions, 13.8 billion years ago. And they're like, no, 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 it's much older than that. It's like 28,000 quadrillion years old. Like they put a date of the creation of the universe that's like millions of magnitudes bigger than the current understanding of sciences. So if you know if this is by no ways a mistake, like the Mayans took great care in preserving the records. We had hundreds and hundreds of books that were burnt during the colonial period, hundreds and hundreds of mountains of books that were burned for like 20 days or something. So a vast, this has been done in also other cultures around the world. The powers that be don't want us to have this knowledge, this information, and a lot of this was lost. But now I think it's an opportunity for us to be like, oh, actually, what if we, revisit, those counting systems, calendar systems, those stories of ancient beings and old time, deep time that it's beyond what we know. And yeah,
Yeah,
so that's just a
I'm
glimpse,
I'm s-
of where like my mind is coming from.
I'm struck by how you're pointing to the depth of knowledge, the longevity of the knowledge, the precision, the complexity that dates so far back and its whole journey through time. And then the loss of that becomes it's exponentially bigger because of the magnitude of the knowledge. And yet you still find a way to frame it for yourself, for us to journey into that destruction as a, how did you call it, like the burning of the field, like a disturbance that actually allows for a reconnection on the other side
Mm,
that becomes a part of the story.
yes, yeah, yeah, exactly. I think I read an Asian philosophy book that some Chinese saying that goes something like, in order to learn something new, you have to empty your cup before you can refill it. And it's the same, in in these cycles and the spirals that happen, these patterns of civilizations that are born out of a landscape that grow and grow, that reach a limit, that sometimes that landscape that fed them and nurtured them cannot sustain anymore, then they collapse. And then it's up to us, to reflect upon that journey. And I think that's the moment at which we are now in our current industrial, digital, and so-called democratic world. This planet has nurtured us. And when I mean us, I mean many of the modern cultures, many of the civilizations on this planet. And that has allowed us to achieve, great feats of engineering, of knowledge, of medicine, in all aspects of, yeah, of the human understanding. We're really close to finding that, that next big thing, like, but then also while we're doing that, like the base of the pyramid is crumbling and it's not going to be able to sustain, this system anymore. because it's so taxing to the landscape, to the environment, to the people itself. So, so I think we're at that point where we need to reflect, and figure out which things we need to let go of. Because as I said earlier, here in our culture, we created the first big city on this continent, or one of the earliest ones. And then what happened is like 900 years in the current era, the city was abandoned. A lot of the ancient cities like Montalban, Tenochtitlan outside Mexico City, Chichen Itza, like around the Mayan Rivera, and many others, they were abandoned roughly around that time. And there's many theories, people say like, yes, there was a degree of climate disturbance that didn't allow these communities to sustain that rhythm of building that was happening. And I've heard stories too of elders that have said that, yes, we did abandon those cities and then we returned to a slower pace of life and we returned to the basics after creating, this perfect calendar and this great understanding of our place in the cosmos. Then like, okay, now it's time to slow down, take a big and exhale, and slow down and go back to basics. Having all this knowledge, or you already have this knowledge. So yeah, I think it's an important moment in our civilization as a humanity, as a collective, you know, cultures and civilizations, around the globe.
Mhm. I love that you're putting this moment into such a large cosmic framework and looking at cycles over generations and generations and maybe even many billions of years, it sounds like. And I'm curious, I guess the last thing I want to ask you is about your personal experience inside of your family, your immediate family and your weavers, and how do you experience your place inside of that old story?
The writings that have survived, like to Spanish, also because unfortunately a lot of us don't speak. Even I don't speak classic Zapotec, the language 500 years ago. But there's ways in which our native scholars are revisiting those texts and translating them, and they're like, our ancestors have been keeping like statistics of all these other older cycles. And yeah, like we know exactly, thanks to the calendar, we're in the year 5147 of the fifth sun. This cycle ends in 53 years when the fifth sun reaches the 5,200 year cycle. And then we start a new sun. But for each decade, like there is very precise warnings and prophecies of things that might happen that actually are kind of happening. And not just in the books, but also in the lore, in the folklore, in the stories. For example, when COVID happened, my dad remembers stories. Oh, your great grand uncle told me these stories. Like there'll be a time when like a lot of elder people will die. There'll be a time where even if you plant all the plots of land that we have, there won't be enough corn for us to eat. But there'll be other foods that will sicken us, but we won't starve. And the rivers will, there'll be a time where they'll be so dry that the ants will build their nests on the riverbanks. And that slowly is happening. Uh, so, so having that memory helps us um, not fear, not to panic, because we know kind of like we have a glimpse of the future. It's not certain, It's just a prediction. It's not a prophecy. It's not deterministic. But there are signs that we know will happen. And I think that's the difference, a culture that's disconnected with those rhythms, with those stories, with that timekeeping panics. So what happened during COVID? Like the Americans rushed to the supermarkets and started to panic buy from toilet paper to everything. Whereas here, we also have a different relationship with death. We sing with death, we laugh with death. And when these times come too, like there's always the elders that remember, oh, these times were meant to be. And it helps us ground, it helps us stay a little more calm. I think end of the day, we're just humans living this existence. But I think those stories and those memories help us and grounds us and nurtures and feeds our spirit. And the way in which we have also been navigating this world as weavers in my community and in my family, I think for me it's personally it's been more staying truth to my being, to my essence. I remember, for instance, that when I was studying, when I was in university, I think my parents were very happy that I was the first one in the family to get a degree, right? And they were always fearful that that we might not always have a weaving business. We're like, maybe, tourism will dwindle. Maybe, I mean, we've been weaving rugs for so many years. Maybe everybody will have a rug by then. And yeah, in the beginning, when I finished my degree, you know, my options were to move to another industrial city and work there as an engineer, which I didn't find my calling. I was like, no, I don't think we're doing it right. The industrial system is extracting, processing, and discarding. So I wanted to do something about it. And in that, I found my calling. I did I applied for a scholarship to do my PhD on sustainable manufacturing to try and find ways in which we could transform our current production and consumption system into a more harmonious system that's more regenerative rather than destructive. So in staying truth to my core values, to my essence, I've been able to adapt to this world. And nowadays, after finishing my degree, I was teaching at a local university, and then I went back to my family business to keep doing what we've always been doing. We've been weavers and carrying these stories and this knowledge, and in times like this, where I meet the right people, the right things align, and we're able to tell our own story, to tell our own memory, that survives through our textiles because these are our books. Then my heart is fulfilled and rejoices, and I feel that connection, that thread that wove me into existence with my parents' hands. And that thread runs back in time, to my grandparents and to their grandparents and so on and back and forth to the goddess of creation. That's Ixchel, as the Mayans call her, the weaving goddess that weaves the reality that we perceive.
Well, you're not only a weaver, you're a poet and an amazing storyteller to bring us full circle back to this image from your dream.
It just aligned perfectly. I didn't have to do anything.
You wove us all the way through, and this feels like such an important conversation. I feel deeply enriched by what you are sharing.
Likewise, thanks for opening, the space and holding the space and guiding the conversation. I think it was really beautiful to reflect and to dive into those thoughts at the end we're just mirrors of each other. You know, we see ourselves in each other's life experience, and I hope this resonates with you and with many people, and we keep this journey, and we keep mirroring each other in the most loving and um, peaceful and non-judgmental way.